Hello, my friends, and I hope you're having a fantastic day. Before we get into it, I wanted to thank everybody for a very nice stream yesterday evening. I love it when you guys come and hang out and chat. It is genuinely one of my favorite things, just because, you never know what you're going to talk about. I never know what people are going to say, and I get to play a video game at the same time. So it's really awesome. Secondly, I would like to say I am setting a goal for myself right now. And normally I do my sales pitches on Mondays when no one's actually watching my videos because I'm doing positive content. But I am pushing for 5,000 subscribers by New Year's. It's not too far off right now. I think it's a more than reasonably reached goal. I'm literally just 225 subscribers away. So if you are someone who isn't subscribed, if you would be kind enough to go ahead and just tap that button, help me reach that goal, I would appreciate it. And I promise not to speak too much on it, just because I know people get irritated when that gets harped on too much, and I don't want to do that to you. But at the same time, I know if I don't say anything, sometimes you just don't think about it. And that's okay too. Right after I got off the stream yesterday evening, I was trying to figure out what my video would be about. Open up Twitter, start scrolling, and sure enough, this pops right up. And I'm like, oh, well, here we go. Perfect. Here is Metaphor Refantazio's success is further proof that politics are good in video games, actually, no matter what reactionaries tell you. And now, this entire article is basically a combination of two things. One, the fact that as much as I appreciate the people who are trying to push the reformation of gaming, the improvement of gaming, whatever you want to call the whole thing, sometimes they don't exactly explain things in the best way. And I understand why they reach for the words they reach for. For one, they're the easiest ones. They make the most sense at the time, especially if you're saying it in a heated moment. And for two, especially when you're trying to get people excited, some words work better than others. Explaining your point in a concise, reasonable manner doesn't always get the troops going, However, we are reaching a point where the tide will turn. And at this point, we do want to start thinking carefully about how we want things to go. Now, I'm not saying that we need to ease off the brakes or we need to start being nice to anybody, but we do need to make sure that we are very clear about what we want so they can't grab these things and turn them back around on us, which is part of what this person's trying to do. I have already read through the article, and when you go through it, you can tell that he understands to some degree what we're saying. And he actually to some degree agrees with what we're saying. His problem is that he can't agree. He can't just say, yeah, video games need better writing. Because if he does, then it sounds way too close to the things that they're calling everybody else bigots for. As a general rule, I avoid the word woke in my videos, partly because, for one, with certain types of people, it makes discussion absolutely impossible. They hear the word, they hear you use it, and they go off the deep end because they think you're trying to make a certain point in their mind, because they are so tied up in the emotional idea of what they think you're saying that they don't actually hear what you are saying. And for the other reason is that honestly, it's just way overused at this point. Everything's woke. You can't put a female in a lead of a game without somebody jumping out of their pants out of fear that, oh no, this girl might be too overpowered. It's going to be another Mary Sue. And I'm honestly, personally tired of that. I like women protagonists in a game, not just because I'm a woman, but just because seeing a man all the time gets boring. And there are plenty of well-written women protagonists. Until we can reach that point again where someone can create a well-written woman protagonist and people don't jump out of their skins just because they're thinking that it might be something else, I'm not going to be happy. So this is just stuff that I want people to generally think about as we're discussing what we want to see in gaming. The smug sense of satisfaction this writer oozes as he creates this masterpiece, this hit piece on the cultural war gamers is honestly disgusting. You can tell he has no real interest in trying to understand the other point of view. More importantly, he is very much trying to hate farm in the same way he accuses other people of. On one hand, I'm not going to call him cringe. It's not really in my vocabulary, but I do hope he's having a lovely day. My day's actually going quite well. I appreciate him doing that. It's always nice when people can start on civil footing, even if we disagree. I also appreciate the fact he admits that what he's building is a straw man, because this entire argument is, in fact, a straw man argument. He takes the most literal interpretation of what some of the most reactionary people say and sticks only to that. But at the same time, as I said, what people say makes it easier for him to do that. When people say we don't want politics and gaming, what they mean is they don't want to open a game and see someone in a different world using the words non-binary exclusively, without some kind of warm-up or introduction about how that culture, how that universe has come to use that word, those wordings. They don't want to see it. They don't want to hear it because it doesn't make sense. It's jarring. It's not good. And it's not creative. Later in the article, he talks about how the veneer, the way that the story's presented really makes people able to swallow these things, more or less, able to deal with them, to settle in them, and to actually have fun with them, no less, but ignores that that's exactly what we're talking about. The best example I have, and I can think of right now, is Tosh from Veilguard, and he talks about them. He talks about her, because I can't do that. It doesn't work in my head. And thankfully, they're a non-existent character, so if you're upset that I am misgendering a pretend being, I don't know what to tell you. The fact that Tosh goes into the conversation with her mother and says that I am non-binary, when in Inquisition, they had actually introduced a word specifically for people who felt born other than what they were, and presented it in a way that it was obviously a prevalent part of Kunari culture, up to the point where Iron Bull mentions that if the character that they're talking to had been born back in the Kunari land, he'd been labeled this and been treated like that and all that stuff. That tells you in Inquisition that the Kunari had something in place for gender differences. And instead of building off of that and incorporating more of that into the world, using actual creativity and presenting it more of an issue of Tosh versus the outside world, which honestly the Kunari have a lot of problems with to begin with, because they are an outside force from Thetis. They are separate, and they are coming in and having to learn all these other things. They could have just literally created more lore and then created a conflict versus the rest of the world. But no, they wanted an interpersonal conflict with family, because honestly, I feel like someone was writing a self-insert. I could be wrong, but that is my opinion. And by writing that self-insert, they completely ignored the idea of writing a good story. They used the story to serve themselves instead of actually using a story to tell people a good story that they could potentially relate to. Yes, a small section of people are going to be able to relate to the story they told. You can't be upset when you aim at a small section of people and not everybody likes it, because you're not looking to make everybody happy. If you have made the small section of people that you were looking for happy, you should be happy, because that was your goal. You can't turn around and be upset because nobody else liked it. Now, I haven't played Metaphor Refantazio, so there's a lot of things that I don't know if they're true or not. I don't know how the game plays, what it's about really, other than from the description that our friend Harvey gives us, which to me sounds like basically a race to the throne. You know, people he puts it like some kind of election kind of thing. And honestly, it sounds like an interesting game. I may have to give it a try in the near future. I did it I kind of enjoyed Persona 4. I wouldn't go so far as to say I really enjoyed it, but it was okay. I mean, it was a good JRPG. I played through the golden version and got the good ending. It's not a game that I would play more than once, but it was fun to play through it once. So from what I'm understanding is that this game is basically a race to the throne. You play a really oppressed minority group that nobody likes and everybody fears, but because your character is so charismatic and talented, people look at him and all of a sudden go, oh God, it's one of those guys. Oh, but he's okay. Which, honestly, when you're looking at a story of a outsider working their way into a society, is normal, because people have to start to be comfortable with things that are outside of what they're expecting, that they find different, or even fear. Coming to an understanding of liking something, or even just not fearing it, even if you don't necessarily like it, is an important part of growing. Apparently in the game, your character has a fictional utopia book, and it says here, the utopia itself scans as an overly idealized version of our own society. It's a democratic meritocracy where all ideas are welcomed, no belief is suppressed, and political corruption is regarded with disdain. Now, while that sounds lovely, utopias don't exist, then they can't for a variety of reasons. You will never have a perfect system, especially when you involve people. Doesn't matter if they're human people or make-believe character people, it doesn't work. But I'll tell you what does work, and I'll tell you why, a major reason why this political stuff works in Refantazio, whereas the political stuff in DragonAge doesn't. Because the political stuff in Refantazio is an actual setup for conflict. It is an actual setup for your characters to fight through and come together in a more heroic manner. Whereas in Veilguard, they work very hard to kill basically any form of actual conflict. Your character is at no point allowed to actually be confrontational with the people around it. A game without actual conflict, without actual stakes, isn't fun. And from everything I've gathered from Veilguard, there is no actual stakes. You don't have any reason to feel invested because of the writing. I've said it in an earlier video, and it's that we need to talk more about the fact that the writing and creativity levels in these games have completely diminished, have gone, with the few exceptions. Baldur's Gate is one of those exceptions. They do an amazing job of painting a story that people can enjoy. And more importantly, if there's something in the game they don't like or that makes them uncomfortable to a point where it's going to drive them away from the game, they don't have to engage in it. The only exception is the whole body type and pronoun thing. And for the most part, honestly, if they actually made the bodies more diverse, I don't think anybody would really be all that upset about that even. I think if you provided blank slate bodies and allowed people to do more in-depth customization, I don't think they'd get upset about calling it A, B, C, D, or whatever you wanted to call it. I could be wrong, but I genuinely believe that if you present it more as a creativity choice as opposed to a, well, we don't want to offend anybody choice, then people will be okay with it. And then it makes sense that you have to assign a pronouns minus the they, them thing. Conflict in these games can serve as an allegory for current day issues, but when it copies it beat for beat, copy paste, it kills the story. And it kills people's desire to want to play the story. Because as has been said time and time again, people play these games for escape. And while getting the message out might be important, if you don't give your message in a way people want to hear it, then your message goes nowhere. People start turning away. People start pushing back. It's part of why just shouting your message at the top of your lungs doesn't help anybody. The other thing I kind of take an issue with in this is they're talking about individualism and how you have to take that into account when you're trying to balance a society, and you can't balance a society. You can't. When you're talking about diversity and minorities, there is only one true minority, and that is the individual. Each and every person has their own issues, their own struggles, their own individual problems that they have to overcome. And no person is equal to another. Most people aren't even equal to themselves on various days. And that is a Thomas Sowell quote. If you don't know who Thomas Sowell is, I highly recommend that you go check him out, because he is an amazingly smart man and an economist. But I don't want to get too deep in the weeds on that, because separate conversations, not video games. Though I will dip into something for a moment here. Opportunity is not about outcome. Opportunity is about chance. And you can't guarantee an equal outcome any more than you can guarantee an equal starting. When talking about the utopia in Refantazio, one of the characters says something: "You cannot pretend at diversity without acknowledging individual differences. Equal opportunity doesn't mean equal footing. Their very aims of freedom and balance could spell doom for the striving weak." And here's the problem, is you can either be equal or you can be free. You can't be both. That is a constant war within humanity that will never probably be particularly solved. So it sounds like this game is taking the concept of utopia, the concepts of freedom, the concepts of equality, and using those to build an interesting narrative. Because those are things that, yes, we fight with in everyday life, but they are also building the basic building blocks of a good story. A good story has conflict. It has intrigue. It even has moral questions in it. Something that people have to stop and think about. But how it's presented is absolutely the number one issue here. And he even goes on to say the reason Refantazio hasn't gotten any anger from the anti-politics crowd is because it's a good story. Because what we want, what we've been saying we want, maybe albeit in a slightly less than clear manner, is good stories. We've all played stories that have concepts that we don't agree with, but as long as the story was a good story, we probably didn't think about it much. The entire fight here is not about politics. It's not about removing skin colors. It's not about removing sexual preferences. It's not about removing entire genders of people from games. It's about the fact that if you're going to put them in, they need to be people and they need to be part of the story. You can't be writing to a checkbox. And it's not conducive to their cause any more than it's conducive to our cause to ignore that. And of course, a good game isn't going to get the same kind of ire a bad game is. It's just not. And to question why one game's getting all this ire while the other one's not, while understanding that one of them has a good story and the other one does not, smacks of the same kind of hypocrisy that he's trying to blame other people for. This article is just as much culture war clickbait as some of the people he is trying to call out. But of course, it's okay on his side because, he's fighting for the right things. Where the other side, they're fighting for the wrong things. Thus, it's wrong when they do it. And that's the problem. Both sides know the issues. One side chooses to ignore what the other side's saying, and then the other side isn't getting what they want, so they're going to keep arguing. It's a back and forth thing. And that's the dumb thing, is there really is room for all of us in gaming. There is. The only problem is, if you're going to make the type of games that draw the ire of the culture war people, you're going to have a smaller audience because the majority of people just want a good game. They don't want a game that just blatantly smacks them in the face and says, you are bad, you need to do things this way. Nobody wants that. Nobody wants to read that story. Nobody wants to watch that story. Nobody wants to play that story. Nobody wants a story that tells them everything, because when you're playing a game, you want to play the story. You want to be involved in the resolution of the conflict. You don't want to watch two other characters resolve the conflict without you. You want to be the one that causes everything. You want to be the star. Playing a video game could be considered a very narcissistic behavior because you want to be in the middle of everything. You are playing the game to be the hero, or anti-hero sometimes, or to even be the villain. You are playing to be at the center of the action. And when the game just tells you everything, instead of letting you play it and see it and experience it, you're not happy. No one's happy. That's why those games don't succeed. That's why games like Dustborn, like Unknown 9, That's why no one's enjoying them, because they don't have the story that puts people in the game, that makes people enjoy the game, that makes people connect with the game. I'd play through Metaphor Refantazio just to see how much of what he says is true, but I need to finish Baldur's Gate 3 first. I really do. I need to actually finish the game before I move on to a new game. I have just a few too many games in the air right now, so I have to buckle down and get through that before I go about picking another game. So we do that first. And I will say, he does at least give some very light criticism to the way they present the gender issues in Veilguard. Now, he has to walk this line because of the situation in which he works. I imagine you don't want to offend the wrong people. But the fact is that when you present a story in the way it has, as I said, it's going to only resonate for a small number of people, and you really can't be all that surprised when not everybody loves it. Goes on to say there's a kind of wokeness threshold going on here, and that's exactly what it is. There is a threshold past which people aren't willing to suspend that belief anymore, and you lose the opportunity to have a conversation because you want to ham-fist your message down somebody else's throat, because you don't have the creative chops required to take the issue that you want to address and do it in a way that people will be left more open. That is one of the beauty of storytelling and gaming in general, is that with the right finesse, with the right practice and the right touch, you can tell a story that will make even the hardest-hearted of persons stop and think for even just a moment about somebody else who they normally would absolutely hate. They could have even just the briefest moment of compassion for somebody that they would despise in any other setting. But to do that, it takes real talent. And there is so very little of that real talent in gaming right now. There is so very little of it that when you have a game that really does it, people eat it up like candy. And that's all we want. We want some more candy, goddamn. We want good games. We want good games that give us good stories, that take us through an adventure, that don't just talk at us. And I don't care if they're talking at us about political stuff or anything else. It doesn't matter if it's a political issue or if it's the most mundane issue ever. People don't want to be talked at, especially not in a game. They want to play the game. They want to enjoy the game. They want to be immersed in the game. And gaming isn't doing a lot of that right now. You can have a game with politics in it, but you have to remember the definition of politics. And you have to remember the light in which you're talking about the conversation. The fact that people like Harvey hear the word politics and immediately think that means any type of politics, anything that involves a government or people struggling against a power structure or whatever, is a problem. It's a problem of both the English language, the way it's being presented, and their own mind. It's a multifold problem, and how to redefine that, how to rephrase that issue without triggering that probably takes a writer with more talent than I have. Because for me, it again goes right back to, it's not about the politics, it's about the story. It's not about the race, it's not about the gender, it's not about the sex, it's about the story. If the story's not good, people aren't going to enjoy it. Everything else doesn't matter without the story. Yes, if the story is going to matter in a game, it has to be a good story. It can be a mediocre story with great gameplay, or it can be a great story with mediocre gameplay. It can't be an absolutely terrible story with mediocre gameplay. It can actually, I will say, it can potentially be an absolutely terrible story with great gameplay. There are small situations in which it can be an amazing story with terrible gameplay, but that one doesn't work out too well too often. That one would be an extremely rare exception case. Gameplay should always be at least mediocre if you want your game to succeed. But story can carry mediocre gameplay. It just won't carry terrible gameplay. It's a little off topic. But in the conversation we're having right now, it is about story. It is about story, and I don't know how many more ways I can rephrase that for people. And that's the issue here, is that no matter what someone like me happens to say. Someone like Harvey is just going to go back around to the, well, politics means this and that means you shouldn't like this game because this game has politics in it. When no, the problem is story. This has a good story. Veilguard does not have a good story. Dustborn did not have a good story. Star Wars Outlaws does not have a good story. Unknown 9 does not have a good story. Concord didn't have anything going for it at all. Didn't even have an okay character. It might have had some story, but no one never really cared. So it probably didn't have a good story. We'll go with that because it was discount Marvels. And the fact that even our games are being likened to the Marvel Avengers and not in a positive way is getting a little scary. I'm not even gonna lie. Nobody has said we don't want politically charged video games. We don't want video games that take today's politics and slap us in the face with them. We want good story. I mean, personally, I would prefer if we remove the word politics from the conversation altogether and say we want good stories. Because if the story's bad and we can so easily pick out the modern day politics from it, that's the issue. It's like trying to get a kid to eat vegetables. If you present them wrong, the kid's going to throw them back at you. But you mix them up into something and you can get the kid to eat it. It's really that easy. Politics are like vegetables. Politicians are like vegetables. That's beside the point. If you want these things in games, you have to handle them right. You have to. You can't just expect people to want it without anything. There is a point in here in which I do agree with him when he says, I want my video games to have ideas in them. I want to be about things and say stuff on occasion. On occasion should be emphasized here. I don't want it to be blatant in my face. I want it to say it in a way that I actually might even enjoy. And the difficult thing about this conversation here is that there are always exceptions to every one of these rules. There is a way to take blatant current day politics and make it entertaining in a game, but you have to be creative with it. You can't just half-ass it and throw it out there and think people are going to love it because you do, or because you think it says what people want to hear. It is all about the creativity. And I guess that's part of the hard part is that we are telling them they're not being creative and it's hurting their feelings because no one's actually told them before that they're not creative. They've always been told what a great person they are. It's that toxic positivity again, man. They don't know how to handle someone saying, no, I don't like this. Because no one's ever really said it. And so then they hear the word politics and they cling to that word instead of the fact that it's the lack of creativity. So I really would like it if people would start thinking more about the fact that it's the lack of creativity and the lack of the ability to tell a story, and less about the fact that you can identify the nasty parts of the story that you don't like. Because I know those parts piss you off still, but they wouldn't piss you off if you didn't quite know so blatantly they were there, unfortunately. And I don't know how many people are willing to admit that either, but it is true. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. Let me know if you got anything out of this weird, incoherent rambling that I just managed to do. I appreciate the time you've spent listening to this, and I look forward to reading your comments. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. Please like, comment, subscribe, and turn on the notifications. If you really liked it, you can feel free to share it around, and I will catch you later.